Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar on the Solar Policy Outlook for 2021, brought to you by AE Solar and Sunrun. Before we begin, if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please notify me by typing in your question in the question section of your control panel on the right side of the screen and click send. I'll try to review and answer any technical questions through the chat. We will also have a Q&A session following the presentation. You're welcome to submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible after the presentation. Any questions that aren't answered, we'll be sure to follow back up with you through email. There will be a brief survey that will pop up in a new window immediately following the webinar. Please take a few minutes to complete it, and we'll email you a copy of the presentation afterwards. We use your feedback to help guide us in the content that we send to you. Now I'd like to introduce today's panelists. We have Anne Hoskins, Chief Policy Officer for Sunrun. We have Evan Dube, Vice President of Public Policy for Sunrun. And we have Josh Brister, Senior Manager of Product Management and Marketing with AE Solar. And Evan, Josh, I'm passing the presentation over to you.
Awesome, thank you, Jamie. Thanks everybody out there for joining us today for what will be a very informational webinar on some public policy fronts in 2021. So very pleased to have our panelists here with us today. And just wanted to share this kind of anecdote about the, behind the curtain of webinar planning, and that's that when we started thinking about this webinar, we knew we'd want to do something in December with regarding policy for the coming year. It's something we've gotten a lot of good feedback on over the years. And when we started having these conversations internally with our marketing team in October, we wanted to pencil in this date, really not knowing what the outcome of some of these really impactful elections would be. So we kind of had it with an open question mark. And as we progressed through the month of November, there was still some uncertainty as to whether or not we'd have finality on some of those elections by the time this date rolled around. So, we're thankful to be here on this, Friday, December 4th with some certainty at some of the high-level elections, and some of the other Senate elections is what I'm thinking about. Remains to be seen for the January runoffs, how those will shake out. But very happy to have this team of panelists here and to have a little bit more certainty as we go into 2021 on some of the things we might see. So just a bit of introductions. Anne, Evan, thank you for joining us. I like to start our webinars here by giving an outline and agenda of what we're going to cover. So a lot of federal updates to cover, what we might look forward to seeing in the new Biden administration, some updates to the investment tax credit. Trade is a big part of the solar landscape these days. And then very near and dear to our hearts, permitting and support for solar app. Then we'll pivot to state policy updates, so recapping some of the things and the priorities we had in 2020. Moving forward into 2021, what are the priorities from our side and what would we like to see accomplished out in the market? And then we always like covering this advocacy overview. So what are some things that our listeners and our dealer networks can do to help, help the efforts on a united front across the country to make solar more prevalent and more affordable for all of our customers out there. And a special sneak preview of a project that we've all worked on that is currently hitting the airwaves. So lots to cover. Let's dig in, and Evan, we're going to start with you.
Great, thanks, Josh. Hello, everyone. Evan Dube, Vice President of Public Policy at Sunrun. I cover the sort of Texas East portion of the country, as well as federal affairs for the company. Thank you for having us. I'll be providing a federal overview, as Josh alluded to, and happy to answer any questions at the end, because there's certainly no shortage of things going on in DC. Kicking off, and I'll sort of take a cue from you, Josh, and opine a little bit on the election. we think certainly it is good news for the industry, what we're hearing from the incoming Biden administration. I think some of that is tempered, frankly, because it was not as good a day for Democrats in Congress as perhaps some had expected or predicted. And with the House losing a material number of seats on the Democratic majority, with the Senate barring something unexpected in the Georgia runoffs, continuing to be held by Republicans and under Senator McConnell, there's certainly going to be some tough slugs ahead for the Biden administration in advancing some of their priorities. That said, everything we're hearing from the Biden camp, both formally in terms of the press and materials they're putting out and an informal conversation, is really very positive and very exciting. Clearly, the administration is going to make climate and renewables a priority. And I think what's even better, a sort of a layer down from that, is I think the administration, especially given the Senate dynamic, is going to seek to make gains on climate and with renewables in what they're kind of describing as an incremental way. And that's sort of DC parlance for moving on things like the ITC, some existing policies, as opposed to, say, coming in with dramatic new policy changes, carbon taxes, things of that ilk. Because there just simply is unlikely to be political will to be able to get things like that done, at least initially. But for us and in the solar industry, I think that's still very positive. And we'll get into some of the particulars around the ITC, as well as soft cost reductions and some of the other focal points that we at Sunrun and others in the industry have been advancing with the transition team.
I would agree with you there that I think a lot of us have been hoping for, some more substantial evolution, but I will surely take incremental improvements over not. Right.
Right. So as most everyone is probably familiar with, the federal ITC is on a step down schedule from the last time it was extended. For 2020, we're at 26%. That's scheduled to decline to 22% and then to 10% in 2022. That dynamic is what it is for the time being, and is fairly straightforward. However, I'm pleased to report that there has been and we hope will continue to be significant momentum towards extending the ITC, although for how long and at what levels are to be determined. We can skip to the next slide, and Josh should go ahead and get into that a bit. So emblematic of what I was just saying around momentum, in 2019, the House passed an ITC extension bill at 5 years and 30%, which is obviously very robust and really exciting and positive news, or a positive sign. However, it faced some opposition, some strong opposition in the Senate, particularly on the Republican side. And ultimately, there wasn't an agreement to be had with the Senate, so the bill died. However, that remains an important precedent because everyone from House Democrats, Senate Democrats, and the administration have indicated that they'll be using that 5-year proposal and legislation as the basis for would-be negotiations around the ITC going forward. In the remainder of this year, for the very short term, the so-called lame duck session, there is some chance that the ITC is addressed. That would likely come in the form of what we call an extenders package. Any existing tax credits, not just the ITC, but any number of different federal tax credits that are due to expire are often reviewed and sometimes extended in these sort of end of year appropriations bills. It's unclear right now whether that is going to happen, and if it were to happen, whether the ITC would be considered this year for an extension, because it's not technically expiring, it's just continuing its step down cadence. But there is some chance. A lot of the national environmental groups, SEIA and others, are continuing to push hard to try and get an extension done this year. But if that is not the case, then it's probably more likely than not. I'm more likely that it will not happen this year. There continues to be good momentum, and it's a good sign that the conversation is on the ITC is as relevant as it is, even in this lame duck period. I think that's really, I'll get a little bit into next year. There's going to be several opportunities next year where the ITC could be considered. There's been a lot of talk about what's called an infrastructure bill. That is traditionally a very large appropriations bill, includes things like highway funding, a lot of big ticket items. In the Biden camp, as well as Congressman Neal, who's the lead budget writer out of the House, have indicated that they would seek to address clean energy in any such package. So we'll have that opportunity, as well as the sort of more traditional opportunities around spending bills at the end, toward the latter half of next year, to pursue an ITC extension prior to 2022 and the decline down to 10%, and for 25D, the residential credit that would be expiring completely at that point. So we're optimistic at this time that there will be plenty of opportunities, and we think we will see something happen in particular next year on the ITC front.
That's very encouraging. All right, thank you.
All right, so trade is always a fun topic, and especially over the last few years, it has been a hot topic. Why don't you talk a bit about the most recent actions regarding the 201 tariffs, the China import tariffs. On October 10th, President Trump put forward a proclamation that did a couple of really important things. One, it removed what had been the existing exemption for bifacial panels from the tariffs. That was stayed due to a complaint filed with the International Trade Court by SEIA and other parties regarding the legality of the president's proclamation. Unfortunately, the court rejected that last week. So the bifacial exemption, module exemption, is currently now gone. There will certainly be industry efforts, I think, led by SEIA to continue to pursue that and to pursue the incoming Biden administration on ways to address the removal of that exemption. But currently, it is no longer on the books. The other really relevant piece to the president's proclamation was that it reduced the scheduled step-down tariffs from 20% to 15% in February of 21, to 18%. So a smaller reduction, which obviously can certainly have material impact. We, along with SEIA and many others in the industry, are also pursuing this problem that relates to the proclamation, both legally and with the Biden transition team. However, it's unclear when a would-be action by the new Biden team could happen, and whether or not that would happen before the scheduled step down on February 7th. So as of now, the step down will be to only 18%, but we're hoping that there'll be action taken in the early days of the Biden administration to go back to the original schedule. An important other trade matter. Oh, and before we move off of 201, it's also expected that the domestic industry will bring forward another case regarding 201, basically to extend the 201 tariffs for another 4 years. There's not a lot that can be done to prevent them from doing so, but given that process will take place under a Biden administration and a Biden court, we feel much better about our chances, and certainly hope that the 201 tariffs will not be extended any further. That's likely to happen in the late spring of next year, and you'll, I'm sure, hear a lot about that, but the industry is making plans to address that already, and we're there too optimistic that we won't see any further tariffs come forward.
Evan, who would be making that case? Because I guess my understanding is some of those original speakers are different organizations now.
Correct. And the thing is, it doesn't necessarily have to be, say, Solar World, right? Or any of the original parties per se. It could be any company having standing, meaning that they are a domestic producer of X amount. So there are companies currently that would be in a position to do that.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Thank you.
Yep. In 301 is a bit of a different animal. There's a investigation around Vietnam and the question of currency manipulation. This obviously is far more broad than just the solar implications, but given that a significant amount of materials are sourced from Vietnam, we wanted to include this because should the court find that there is currency manipulation going on the part of Vietnam, there could well be tariffs imposed on either all imports or on a vast array of imports from Vietnam coming into the country. Those hearings are ongoing now through the end of this month, and there'll be some continued process into January. And at that point, we should know a little bit more about the findings of the court and any would-be implications for Vietnam. The last one here is really an important topic and one we wanted to talk about. Congress, the House, has passed a forced labor bill for, regarding the Xinjiang region in China. There's long been speculation that forced labor is being used in that territory to make any number of products via manual labor. The House passed legislation effectively prohibiting the importation of goods into the United States from the region. We anticipate that the Senate will do the same. The House passed that legislation by nearly unanimous consent. I think there were only 3 opposing votes in the House. And candidly, it's an important piece of legislation, and there are really serious charges in play here. So we're flagging that there probably early next year, the Senate will take action, this legislation will pass, and any imports from the region coming into the United States would be prohibited unless there can be a showing that no forced labor was used. However, that burden of proof with customs will be nearly impossible, we believe, to meet. So we all really have to look hard at our supply chain and where, in particular, the polysilicon coming out of China comes from, and whether or not it's been sourced in the region. So I would say that one is a kind of heads up that these actions are likely to transpire, and everyone should be taking stock of that and preparing accordingly.
Oh. Very serious stuff, and it's just, you know, further reminders of how interconnected our global supply chains are these days. Yeah.
Yes.
Solar app.
Solar app.
Yeah.
Yes. So Solar app is a really exciting new initiative that we at Sunrun have undertaken, along with several others in the industry, with NREL and with DOE, to bring forward digitized permitting, automated permitting that can really have a dramatic impact on reducing the industry's costs, permitting costs, and speeding up times dramatically. And we think is really a game-changing platform. On the federal side, in the appropriations bill that I mentioned earlier, language is included to provide $35 million in funding to DOE to address Solar app, as well as the umbrella of permitting and soft costs to the solar industry. We're really excited about that. We think under a Biden-led DOE, DOE will move rapidly to continue to expand the Solar app platform and begin to really push the platform forward with local AHJs. And we're seeing not only momentum within Congress and in DC, but also around Solar app from locations and inspection teams throughout the country.
Yeah. Well, I guess one good thing that's come out of, if there is one good thing that's come out of COVID, is it's led a lot of jurisdictions to streamline their permitting and their e-permitting processes. And, you know, certainly wish something like this had been ready, you know, in time for that. We would have shaved a lot of days and saved a lot of projects nationwide, I think.
Totally, and not to skip into the state updates, but just a pet project of mine to that point, Josh, in New Jersey. We believe that there will be a permitting reform bill passed out of the Assembly next week and sent to the governor's desk that would be really a first of its kind expedited permitting requirement at the state level. And I think the main driver there has indeed been the difficulties around COVID and how the state can respond.
Yeah. Well, that's great news, and that's a great segue. Anne, you want to walk us through some state developments?
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. I have had the pleasure of meeting with you a few times in the past, usually in San Diego area, but it's nice to be here with you virtually anyway, and I appreciate you joining us this morning. And thanks, Evan, for giving us an overview on the federal side. So as you know, any of you have heard us before on this, Sunrun is really the leading advocacy group in the country advancing solar policy interests and storage, obviously now solar and storage. And we do a lot in Washington, as Evan talked about, but we also, focus on key states, and certainly what Sunrun focuses on is our market states. Sometimes we'll engage in some others, but the picture in front of you, the map, you'll see the states that we operate in directly as Sunrun, and where we focus our advocacy work. And as usual, there's a lot going on, and I'm going to talk to you at the end about ways in which I hope you can engage, because what we really need to do is to get more voices out there. As you know, the solar industry is a tremendous driver of jobs and economic growth, which is what this country needs right now, given the COVID challenges. So we have an opportunity. We also know that many companies really suffered through COVID, and now with this new phase that we're in, we're still going to have challenges here, certainly for the next quarter, I would say, in terms of potential shutdowns and the like. So I do want to touch briefly on Solar App. As Evan said, we have been we've been working very closely with NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and the tool is really ready for prime time. It's up and running now in its first market out here in California, and we are actively testing it, piloting it with other jurisdictions. So for those of you who, have an interest in this, which I think everybody should, we found that compared to countries like Australia or Germany, it costs about $1 a watt more to install solar in the US than in those other countries because they do have much more automated permitting and interconnection. This is the time to engage. And, we're going to try to get this federal funding, but we're also going to be working in these states across the country to work with our local solar associations, to talk with governor's offices, energy offices, and AHJs about adopting this tool, right? The tool's no good if people don't adopt it and take the work that's needed to do it. So sometimes we find that having companies with a local presence in a state, is really helpful for getting that message across. And this is the time, this next year for Solar Up, for us to just massively get out there and try to get this thing adopted. So start with that, but let's move on to the next slide, and I'll go over some of the developments in 2020. It was a very, as we all know, a different year with COVID. We didn't have as many active legislative sessions. Some of the regulatory proceedings were slowed down, but there was still quite a lot happening remotely, just like all of you, and you're, having to bring some of your work remote. Our policy team, also adjusted and, has done a lot of advocacy online through these kind of the conferences and the like. So we were able to accomplish quite a bit, but I think 2021 is going to be a different ball game in terms of, a heightened amount of activity. But some of the things that we did accomplish, in the we call it customer compensation, you might think of it as NEM more, but one of the core issues always is how are our customers going to be compensated for the power that they share. And this is traditionally something that utilities fight us on very hard because they don't want to see customers reduce their use of their kilowatt hours. They want to, we're competition to them. And so every year we have customer compensation cases. One of the big issues, and Evan led this for us in New Jersey, is the SREC program in New Jersey, which has been critical for making that market work and grow to a very important solar state, obviously. And so we were engaged in legislation and regulatory work to enable what we're calling a SREC transition program. I think it gets referred to as TREC. And that we will now have to work this year on, working on that transitioning to the next type of REC program. So there's going to be a lot that needs to be done. And obviously in New Jersey, as we see in other places, you have utilities and other interests questioning the value of that, questioning whether it is too expensive. And so again, if you have operations in New Jersey, or you're serving customers in New Jersey, really important to pay attention to New Jersey and help us get the message out about the importance of solar. And we also saw Florida, Massachusetts, and Vermont. There were NEM cases or NEM investigations, and we were successful in pushing those back and getting outcomes that would enable to keep the markets going. But you'll hear shortly, there's a lot more of that coming down the pike. Battery incentives, for those of you who are involved in batteries, this has been a really exciting, I would say rather defense. It's what we view as an offensive or opportunity based advocacy, where we go out and we try to tell the story of batteries and what a difference they can make for resiliency, particularly in states that have faced a lot of climate challenges, whether it's the fires in California or the hurricanes in the East Coast, the storms, et cetera. And so, in the last couple of years, we've been seeing states look at, okay, do we want to incentivize these batteries? And those incentives have been critical in the states, where if you see states that really have battery growth, usually there's an incentive involved with it, because the cost of batteries are still, coming down, but not where we hope they'll be in a few years anyway. So, California, the SGIP program we've been able to get additional funding moved forward in that program. Some of that funding was focused on resiliency areas, on low-income customers. That funding is running out. So I think there's going to be a question, should we try to get some more of that? Or how do we manage that? Arizona their commission just agreed to a standard to support significant battery growth in that state in the next few years, which was something we never would have imagined, honestly, a few years ago in Arizona, which has traditionally been pretty anti-solar, anti-distributed solar, but we have an opportunity there. So if you have Arizona presence, this is a really good time to engage with ARISEA, which is the local solar organization. Massachusetts Clean Peak Standard standard program was approved, which also is really helpful for batteries. Beyond direct incentives, one of the things that's been driving battery growth are rate structures, or rates that will pay more for customers sharing their power at different times, right? When it's at peak times, because that provides a lot of value to the system. And it can justify incentives or greater compensation to the customers who share that power. And then, Virginia is a new DG state, really, with legislation that passed. And as I already mentioned, Arizona. So we're definitely seeing states recognize that, batteries are really going to be critical for bringing more distributed resources onto the grid, but also for solving some of these very difficult system problems they have with their infrastructure, which, as we all know, is over 100 years old. All right, the distribution system, there's really high costs of building transmission. So now we've got these batteries, but what we need to do as an industry is to get that message out about, hey, the technology's here. It may still be like a little expensive, but that's where public policy can play a role in helping to target those incentives to continue to build demand, which is going to bring down the cost in this cost curve for technology. So, big year ahead for us again on batteries. Another thing you'll hear mentioned, BYOD, is bring your own device. And that's situations which that kind of approach has been used in the energy efficiency world for some time, like with thermostats or the like, where basically competitive companies can sell the batteries, and then customers can essentially be signed up through a tariff to get an incentive for having that device available if it needs to be called on, sort of as a demand response type resource. And we're seeing that a lot in New England, and one of our colleagues was very much behind developing that, Chris Rauscher. So we're quite strong in our advocacy on the value of bring your own device. And I think that, you're starting to see like Arizona looking at it now, Illinois looking at it now, but it was kind of the Northeast approach to engaging utilities in supporting batteries, because utilities, if they treat it like an energy efficiency program, they're often given incentives from their regulators. And so that's been quite interesting to see, is the different approaches in different parts of the country. And we really try to focus our advocacy with that in mind. Something that works in California isn't necessarily going to work, certainly in South Carolina. So we are very focused regionally on what works, what makes sense with their regulatory structures. And then another really important development that is actually in the federal realm, which will be important this year too, is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission issued a rule a couple of months ago now, which has been in the works for a couple of years, which is opening up the wholesale markets to distributed resources. And a lot of work has to be done in the coming year with these regional transmission organizations, or RTOs and ISOs, to get the rules right. They have to file tariffs about what they will do to enable companies that will aggregate batteries, or individuals, I guess, to offer their battery services to the wholesale market for capacity or other services. And this is something that Sunrun is actually engaged with a couple of years ago with New England ISO. We're the first company to do that, but now this is opening it up nationwide. There's something 7 or 8 of these different regional organizations. It's going to take a lot of work, again, and resources, which you're going to hear me repeat this over and over, but we need more people and more companies than Sunrun out there doing this, because there's so many opportunities. There's also a lot of risks. but we really are at a time where if we can start to show our power more with our voices and our contributions, it could really pay off in a very big way for the industry. And then as Evan mentioned a little, with Solar App, there's other work that's being done across the country. Solar App, we're ready now to really push that, and as Josh mentioned as well, when COVID hit, many of these agencies shut down. Sunrun spent a lot of time and resources literally going to all the key AHJs and convincing them to open up and allow submissions through email, even if that's not the fastest, not to shut down. And so we also did a lot of work initially, you may recall, in some states, it still is the case, you had to be an essential business to even install. And we were not on everybody's list as an essential business. So it was quite a lot of discussions to explain why solar is essential. It was particularly helpful that it was going into wildfire season. So we were able to explain certainly solar and batteries were going to be essential for people who needed the backup. But I think also just trying to get the message out that one, we are an important business, but also we can do it safely. And that has been safely and, remotely, like doing the sales remotely. And then on the install, doing it with contactless, installation, social distancing, masking, everything. And so I would say also, to the extent you are involved directly in installations or work with companies that are, these next couple of months, I will not be surprised if we're already seeing, more tightening. Really super important that we emphasize as an industry to maintain, to really focus on safety and make sure we are being an example for others, because we want to make sure that we continue to have this kind of overall recognition of not only are we critical, but we're also doing it in a really socially responsible way. And so that was, honestly a pretty scary time in March and April. And, we were able to get over that. And I just want to ask everyone to be vigilant and continue to focus and to stay safe for you and your teams, because it's also just obviously still a scary time for, our society. Next.
I wanted to take a moment here, Anne, to share a bit of a personal anecdote that's also a bit of an appeal for support out there on the topic of NEM protection and compensation protection. We had a value of solar study here in my local AHJ, SMUD, where they're looking to roll back the retail rate and in their words try to come up with fair compensation for net metered energy. And really, I had always thought of SMUD as a very progressive utility, certainly compared with some of the neighboring utilities. And they're so progressive that they're seeking to value distributed energy resources the same that they would large utility scale fields. So this was an opportunity for us to bring up the fact that customer-sided solar has so many more advantages than utility scale when it comes to resiliency and grid support. And there's an opportunity to introduce storage resources as well. But really the appeal here to you guys is that these studies and these technical working groups are taking place all over the country, and they need subject matter experts and they need solar advocates who can step up and say, look, this is our business, this is our livelihood. We provide an essential service to all of these homeowners throughout, the utility territory. And it's, can sometimes be tedious, and some of these utility hearings are very long, but they need to hear from folks like you guys on why this is an essential business and why customers deserve fair compensation for the power they're providing to the grid. So just wanted to share that these opportunities are everywhere.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And yeah, we always appreciate it too when we get people from our business who are willing to come out and speak and meet with people, because it does, they like to hear from all of you versus just people like Evan and me all the time. So it's great. It's as much fun as we are to talk to. It's still a good thing.
Very fun.
So, all right, so now let's look to 2021. As I said, and I think this is a really important year for our industry. It's exciting in many ways because we have had these technology developments. And also, we do have this new administration in Washington that is going to speak positively, has set aggressive goals. We also have a number of governors, right, who have set very aggressive climate goals that they have to figure out how ways to start making progress. You always used to hear 2030 like it was a long way away. Well, guess what? Now we're going to be 8 years away. It's coming. So that's the positive side. The negative side of it is, like Josh sort of alluded to, is that utilities really feel us as competition. They're worried about losing customers. They also have very strong, plans of their own of wanting to grow, which means more investment in the traditional system of transmission lines, distribution lines, et cetera. Or they see, oh, now we realize it really is the case that people want this, so we'll just do it ourselves, okay? So, there's a lot going on that way, which is, again, unfortunately, I think we all have good stories to tell and track records now that, look, competition really works, and with competition, that's what's driving this innovation. But, just so you know, in this year, we are seeing compensation, NEM, solar incentive challenges or reviews, just sort of statutorily defined review periods in critical states, right? California is a NEM 3.0. We are going to be putting on, I would say, an aggressive campaign to make sure people understand what's at stake here. And if you want to join that campaign, please let us know, because we really want it to be more than just the Sunruns and the Teslas, right? We really, really want more people involved. Connecticut is looking really positive. We've got a commission there that's very committed to this and is, looking at the facts, and we're feeling confident. But again, if, there was legislation a couple of years ago that was very much focused on killing our industry, and this is the regulatory proceeding, and we're doing our best to make sure we get the rules right on that. Hawaii is very exciting. Hawaii has often been in the forefront of, because electric rates are so high, weather's so good, lots of sun, but they're looking at really, reimagining the way that you would do regulation to encourage a more distributed system. And we've got some exciting work being done there. So that's interesting to see, as particularly with high penetration levels of solar in that state. Illinois, for any of you, Illinois is a really growing market, but it is growing because a couple of years ago we were successful in passing an incentive that's quite generous for solar, and that incentive is running out probably first quarter of next year. So we are working on legislation right now to get that incentive extended. Unfortunately, COVID again has been really challenging. So the legislators were supposed to be in now in a lame duck session. It was canceled because there were legislators with COVID. So we're looking at this as in the January timeframe. So that's going to be important to be out there and make sure Illinois legislators realize what's at stake here. New Jersey, as I mentioned, not only, we have that continuing rec case, and will be important as we have a very aggressive utility there that's trying to get into the business directly, right? So I think you'll hear a lot in New Jersey about how expensive this is versus going with offshore wind or utility scale in Pennsylvania and piping it in through utility supported transmission lines. Florida Florida should, as we all know, Sunshine State, should have always been a great competitive solar market. It's been a tough market for years because of the powerful utilities that are down there that also NextEra and FPL very much, want to control this through community solar, through other initiatives. But we've opened up that door. Sunrun a few years ago was able to get through a leasing regulation that has allowed third-party development of solar, and there's also a really, a healthy cash market down there. But we are fully expecting, as we're starting to grow there, that FPL and Duke will try to make a run at this in the legislature. They tried through the commission here a few months ago, and we were able to stop that. So Florida, I would imagine, is going to require some significant legislative work this year. South Carolina has been a state that has had active regulatory work ever since I've been here for 4 years. We were able to pass an extension of the NEM cap, I think a year and a half ago, and are now at the commission trying to work to get a settlement that will allow that market to continue. But a really critical issue that'll come up below too is it's really hard to make South Carolina work because they because of some property tax issues. So, you know, we think we'll be at the legislature on that level as well. And then Arizona, you know, Arizona a few years ago also implemented a change to NEM where every year there's a step down in the compensation level. And so that's always an issue every year. We were able to get that stayed here about a month ago, the step down that was supposed to happen. And now it'll be up for consideration again. So, you know, once again, like if you get a situation where your customers are not going to be able to recoup enough money for the power they would share with the grid, either they've got to put a battery in, which is something we work on so they can keep more of their power, or we have to find a way to keep that compensation to a level that's going to make economic sense, or else you won't have people buying these systems. A couple other areas, battery incentives, we're going to keep pushing because, as I said, I think this is the time. We've got great batteries, we just have to get them in more people's hands and build that market, hopefully get some more battery developers out there. And I think this is the future, right? Where we see a future where hopefully, you know, soon everyone who puts a solar system on is going to have a battery because it makes sense, right? Like you can do it together and we can have a new energy system that is much more distributed and resilient. So it's a great story, and we just have to all keep pushing and telling that story. So we're looking at a lot of activity in Arizona, California, Illinois, New Jersey. Property tax relief is something that is important, particularly for people in the who offer third-party ownership and leasing and PPOs. So a couple of key states there, Texas, South Carolina, Connecticut, California, just trying to make the point that, you know, we want to make sure this stuff makes economic sense and that our projects bring a lot of value to communities. They bring jobs to communities. They bring sales tax. They bring, you know, reduction of other kind of problems. So that's the advocacy that we're using to try to just reduce that burden and make these systems more cost effective. And then I think, you know, we've talked about all the work we're doing on getting the word out on Solar App, but there's a lot of other things. You know, for those of you who are working on storage, one of the challenges that we've seen is, you know, we go and we're installing these systems and they'll often require main panel upgrades. You know, people's older homes are not able to accommodate batteries and solar. And so this MPU process ends up being very slow with the utilities. They all say they have to come out, they have to inspect it first, they have to inspect it later, they have to move a meter. And, you know, we are trying very hard in California in particular to work with the commission here to say, you know, this really isn't necessary. Like maybe we can send you a picture, maybe you can let our people do some of the changes, you know, trying to put in some technology changes, but you know, it's kind of like Groundhog Day. We've seen this before. We bring out something new and the utilities say, you know, they've got to charge us extra for it. They've got to have their own people come out and do it. And we really need to make this so that it's more like an appliance. You know, people have to get used to it. I mean, people have to understand storage, the permitting officials have to, and the utilities have to. But once we get that, we got to find a way to standardize it. We are adding to Solar App a storage component for the permitting offices. So we hope that will help in terms of expediting getting solar and battery proposals through. We know that, you know, Hawaii, we're really excited. We're working there with some of them, I think Honolulu to, you know, get some approvals on permitting, but also work with HECO on the interconnection, you know, pre-approvals. Big Arizona interconnection implementation, and then we've got some Rule 21, you know, implementations in California. So a lot of this area that I would call, you know, how do we just make it easier, right? Like I had my dishwasher broke the other day, so I had to get a, you know, dishwasher replaced, and somehow I was in my little office here and they were able to come replace it and leave. I didn't even know, you know, it was like my husband let him in. It was so simple, and obviously it's not quite the same thing, but you know, it's like that's our vision though, that this should not be something that is so difficult that takes literally months to get a system approved and up. And that would be a great story for you to be able to share with the you know, the public officials, your local officials, your utilities you work with, like, hey guys, like, let's try to work together and find a way through this. Okay, let me finish up here. I think I'm close to finish. Is that maybe the last? Oh yeah, I don't know. Let me give you the pitch here then. So you can see we have a lot on our plate. And the good news is that Evan led this effort. We just had a really exciting study completed with a bunch of organizations. It was really out of the Northeast. And we can get you this full report that really looked at different changes in the way we do modeling for what the costs and benefits are to our electric system, because the prevailing thinking out there that the utilities have spent a lot of money putting into people's heads is that utility scale is cheaper. You know, like, hey, it's 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour if you for the generation of the big solar project out in the field hundreds of miles away, without taking into account that, you know, you have to have transmission. You also, it doesn't work if the system gets shut down with these power shutoffs. And also that there's variability then when you plan a system just looking at the utility scale and centralized structure, but at the same time we're having all these distributed resources coming on the grid. If you don't take that all into account, you end up over procuring things that you don't need, and then having to do a lot of extra kind of interventions to smooth out the grid, essentially. And they say it a lot better in the study. But they looked at this in a different type of modeling, and they found that, you know, if they plan, if the regulators around the country would recognize the potential for distributed resources and distributed batteries, we could save $473 billion. It's pretty amazing. And at the same time, actually enable continued increased growth of the utility scale clean energy, because it's just the way that the different type of resources can be optimized and work together. And so we just got this report released. We're trying to get this message out to regulators and leaders, but I do suggest after you guys fill out their review here today to get a copy of these, and I think that will link you to the report. And if it doesn't, Josh, we should just get them the report. And
we'll include that. Absolutely.
We can go to the next slide here. So you'll see one of the things they found in the report, really significant cumulative, you know, electricity, you know, savings here, particularly when you take into account that many of these states have very aggressive clean energy goals. So, you know, to get to these goals, there's going to have to be investments. So they look to see, well, what if you did it with just, you know, business as usual plans, or if you built in these DERs, and you'll see that the savings are significant. Not immediately, but if you look at this over a little bit of a longer time period. And then also the job creation, you know, you're all here, like, we are a job generator. And the problem with, you know, some of the utility scale and centralized resources is that, you know, they don't create as many jobs as we do. So lots of opportunities. We're coming out of COVID, and we have a need in our economy to create new jobs as the transition goes from more carbon intensive energy sources. Like, we've got a good story, we just have to tell it. Next.
Absolutely.
So just really quickly here, I think I've actually shown you this slide before, just to remind you though how we do this. We do it in multiple ways. We do the traditional litigation and regulatory cases, which we'll be doing in the NEM case and others. We also make partnerships. We're always looking for new organizations who are engaged with us. We do lobbying, you know, direct lobbying of legislators, and you know, going and advocating for our work. So it's sort of more the lobbyists and the lawyers. And then we have something called outside game, and this I want to talk to you a little bit about. This is like how we brought Josh in to, you know, talk to regulators, is actually taking the power of our customers, their voices, making them be heard through social media, through media, you know, paid media, regular op-eds you probably read sometimes from Sunrun. This is very focused efforts, and just stakeholder engagement. And I've got some examples of how you all can do that here. I think next. Yeah, so how can you do this? There's a couple of ways. One that we're very focused on right now in California, again, big year with NEM 3.0, is something called the Solar Rights Alliance. And so the Solar Rights Alliance started a few years ago, where customers can be activated through the Solar Rights Alliance, where like Sunrun will share, you know, customers have to agree to this, obviously, we'll share our customer names with the Solar Rights Alliance, so that Solar Rights Alliance can keep them informed of what's going on, just like we're doing this presentation with you. If there's a big case like the SMUD case that Josh talked about, or NEM, that could affect them, or even if it doesn't affect them directly, could affect solar in general, which these tend to be people who care about solar, having invested in it. And they will get updates, and they will be able to, you know, get an email that says, click this and send a note into your legislator. And it's really, really effective to have real people who have solar, just like we said, real businesses, real customers weigh in. And Solar Rights Alliance is the way to do that. So if you're interested and open to sharing your customer list, and again, no one's going to sell against your customers. It truly is trying to just be a source of information to empower those customers to speak on behalf of their interests and the interests of solar. And so Sunrun has done this, and some other companies are doing it as well. And we think it's just really critical. And there's so Solar Rights Alliance is in California, and there's another organization called Solar United Neighbors, which covers much of the rest of the country. And so what we're trying to do is to give information, you know, let those entities know who your customers are so they can reach out to them. And so if you're interested in that, Dave Rosenfeld is the leader of Solar Rights Alliance. We've got his contact there, and Anya Schoolman is the head of Solar United Neighbors, and her contact information is there. But then we also have more traditional organizations. SEIA is, I'm the vice chair of the SEIA board, so I'm active in SEIA. Obviously, they do a lot for us on the federal level, as well as, you know, support state work, and they're always looking for new members. There's varying levels of membership. You don't have to pay at the higher level. There's different ways to engage. And then we have the regional organizations. And so CALSA, California Solar Storage Association, is really important in California for advocacy. But we have similar groups across the country: Arizona, New York, Colorado, Illinois. So if you have areas that you're particularly interested in, participating in that is not very expensive. And they're always looking for new members. I know we're running out of time, and I do have to show you a quick cool video in a second. So that brings us to one of the things that these groups worked on together. And one of the outside game approaches that we do, and we actually didn't do this, you may recognize this guy, Jonathan Scott. I don't do a lot of home improvement, but there is this cool home improvement show that people like. And he put a Sunrun solar system on his home a few years ago, and through that process started to learn about solar and started investigating it, and was really upset to find out how many barriers we face in bringing this service to customers. And so he did a trip across country to investigate this, and he has done a movie called Power Trip Truth, and it was just released about 2 weeks ago, and it's going to be showing over for the next month. And we have arranged, well, we haven't, but our organizations have arranged to do showings here for free next week. One's on Tuesday and one's on Thursday. On this, you will see some Sunrun people, because some of our folks did get interviewed down on the Solar United Neighbors. Alex McDonough, you may have heard from him last year, I think. You know, he recently left Sunrun, but was very engaged in the Nevada cases a few years back. And then we've got another colleague, one of our installers, who's interviewed in this film, and she's going to speak on a panel. So I'm going to show you the preview, and then encourage you to sign up and just listen into this film, either on Tuesday or Thursday. And by doing that, also, you'll learn a little bit about, one of them is sponsored by Solar Rights Alliance, and the other one's sponsored by Solar United Neighbors. And, you know, you can learn a little bit more about what they do. And I just want to thank you again for your time, your interest. We've probably run out of time for questions, but we're always available too if you want to, you know, email Evan or me, or Josh. You know, we're always happy to talk with you if you're interested in engaging in any of this. So do we want to run that?
Yeah, let's do that, and we'd be more than happy to follow up with any questions offline. So we'll get this started here, and hopefully everyone can hear it okay.
My name is Jonathan Scott. I make a living fixing up homes and helping families. When I decided to power my home with the sun, I had no idea that a simple solar install would become a search for truth.
Utility regulators raised rates for rooftop solar customers.
Is a sin and a battle over the future of energy in America. Utilities are losing money because now you have control over what electricity you use it from where. Someone somewhere was spending millions to make billions.
They want us to stay addicted to their monopoly model and guarantee profit.
And the profits far outweigh the human cost.
Coal companies and their coal associations have been very effective.
How many friends have you lost?
My dad worked 38 years. He was 68-year-old when he died. That black one.
And you have
I have it too.
70% of African American communities live within 30 to 40 miles of a toxic emitting power plant.
The coal ash, we didn't think anything of it until suddenly we realized that there were diseases breaking out through the community. The doctor said, "Oh, you live near Cancer Lake."
On my journey, I met the corporations in control. Are there situations where, as a human being, you have a conflict as a utility company?
I think that's just the way it has been.
That's the worst explanation. They're doing everything they can to stifle what the people want, and it's the most frustrating thing. And the people fighting back.
I'm not the only one in the South that's a conservative that loves solar.
You put these silly national parties and politics aside, and you can do things that really help everybody.
This is about people. This is about their lives.
In our culture, the sun is a powerful symbol.
With the solar panels, I will breathe, I will milk, it's great.
Our health has been compromised. Our rights have been taken away, but it's not too late to fight back. When it comes to energy freedom, this country has a long, long way to go. What's preventing everybody from having this?
Good stuff. Awesome. Evan, Anne, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We will, we're more than happy to handle any of your questions offline, and we will reply back to each one of those. So thanks, everybody. Have a great Friday.
Thank you.
Bye.